Buenas tardes a todos. Buenas tardes a todos los que estáis aquí y los que estáis en vuestras, donde os parezca, conectados a estos. Como sabéis, vamos a desarrollar en inglés. We are going to switch to English to introduce the people who are responsible for that. You can see here on my left, Brandon Thompson. We are organizing that with the U.S. Embassy here in Madrid, and you could see on the screen Michelle Bowman and Stephen, both responsible for the energy information as administration, as project manager. Later on, will be presented by Pablo de Juan. As you know, he is going to introduce them after that. Well, thank you very much for being here. The people who are being here at the office, the people who are outside. This is not the first time we are organizing this with the U.S. Embassy. We did that, I think, in January 2023, RIA section there. And we did with the Energy Information Administration, I think in 2021, we introduced that. The report of the 2021 International Outlook Energy and the domestic U.S. Energy Outlook too. Maybe Michelle after that could be introduced. The several outlooks they are doing right now. And now we are trying to introduce in that time, because we have seen that the Energy International Agency has put out this report 2023 in October last year. A little bit different from the reports we are presenting here from the International Energy Agency. It could be different, and the basis they are doing is the same. They always say that this is not a forecast. This is the political established situation, and maybe Michelle after that could explain what are they doing with this kind of thing. It's a pleasure for us of having all of them here. They are going to present the report, and the people who are here, you can ask a raise your hand and ask whatever you want to them. They are open to answer this question you have. As you have seen, we have introduced in this presentation a report about LNG, a report or something like this about LNG, because as all of you know, because you are in this business, the supplier of LNG from the US has changed completely in the last 3 or 4 years. Here we have gas people, other people involved in LNG areas, and they know very well as everybody that the forecast, LNG forecast, the Energy Information Administration could be useful for all of us. And for our side, thank you once again, and I will go to give the floor to Brandon Thompson. I'm going to introduce himself. He came here 6 months ago or 7 months ago. He started, he has continued this relationship with us. Before was another guy, other people there. He has been in the diplomatic service or in the foreign service for many years, in more difficult spots than we are here, in Afghanistan, in Pakistan, in Mexico too, and he's very happy here, he told me. Well, he's going to introduce these guys. Thank you, Brandon, the floor is yours.
Bueno, Arcadio, muchísimas gracias. Soy Brandon Thompson de la Embajada de Estados Unidos. Vamos a hablar en inglés porque mis colegas de Washington no hablan español. So, thank you, Enerclub, and welcome everyone here to this event today. So today we're very honored to host 2 esteemed experts, Michelle Bowman and Stephen York, from the U.S. Department of Energy's Energy Information Administration, or the EIA. So the EIA has been a cornerstone for informed decision-making across various sectors since 1977, providing independent, accurate, and timely information of energy dynamics and their interaction with the economy and our environment. So Michelle and Stephen, who are here with us virtually today, will guide us through one of the EIA's flagship publications, which they helped model, analyze, and publish, the International Energy Outlook, which provides an in-depth analysis of the long-term energy trends through 2050, not just in the United States, but across the globe. Released in October, this year's outlook arrives as the energy landscape undergoes profound transformations. The world is navigating a period of global economic change characterized by multipolar power struggles, escalating climate threats, and a critical need for supply chain resilience. These challenges are amplified by growing income inequality and threatening our social fabric. Amidst this backdrop, the US has embarked on a historic journey, which I'm sure many of you are aware of, the passage of the Inflation Reduction Act, or IRA, which represents the most significant industrial policy since World War II. Projected to spur $3 trillion of investment in renewable energy technology, the IRA will transform key sectors of the economy, including infrastructure, clean energy, and innovation. The IRA's focus on accelerating technology development and adoption is pivotal for the global transition toward a sustainable and resilient energy future. By fostering innovation and driving down costs, the Act seeks to enhance the adoption of clean technologies. In our view, it's a historic achievement for climate ambition and a historic commitment by the United States that brings us closer than we've ever been to meeting our climate goals. The IRA's focus on resilience, reindustrialization, job quality, and economic geography reflect bipartisan understanding, which is not always today. Bipartisan, exactly. Yeah, well, of the need for more diversified and robust economy. The outlook is designed to discuss the uncertainties of the energy market, which could include policy changes, technological advancements, and evolving geopolitical climate, offering comprehensive analysis of potential future scenarios. So I don't want to take up any more time. You all are here to hear the experts, Michelle and Stephen. But just leaving it that as we stand at the crossroads of an evolving global energy landscape, let us consider how these projections and policies will shape not only the energy sector, but also the broader socioeconomic landscape in the years to come. So in closing, I'd like to thank again the EIA team for their tireless efforts. Their expertise and dedication have culminated in a report that I think will inspire us to think critically about the role we each play in navigating the complex energy landscape of the 21st century. We will need innovative policies, technologies, and strategies to navigate the energy transition. And the insights provided today will be invaluable in guiding our efforts to shape a sustainable and secure energy future for all. So thank you for your attention. I look forward to the presentation from my colleagues and to the discussion afterwards. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Brandon. I will give the floor before Pablo to introduce the CV of Michelle and Stephen. Okay, Pablo?
Okay, yeah, I'll present Michelle and Stephen. So after 11 years at the U.S. Department of Defense, Michelle joined the agency in 2012 as an electricity analyst, leading the development of a new international electricity model. She is now in her 4th year overseeing the broader international energy outlook, and she has a Bachelor of Science in Biology and a Master of Science in Computer Science, both from the College of William and Mary. And Stephen joined the agency in 2019, initially as a natural gas analyst with the focus of forecasting natural gas in the short term. In 2021, Stephen became the lead natural gas modeler for the annual energy outlook. Prior to the EIA, Stephen worked at the Bureau of Labor Statistics for 5 years as an economist, and he has a Bachelor of Arts in Economics and International Relations from George Washington University and a Master of Science in Applied Economics from Johns Hopkins University. So they will be giving their presentation for about 20-30 minutes, and then we will have a Q&A session. As Arcadio said, the ones that are here, you can just raise your hand and we will give you the microphone. And the ones that are connected, they can ask their question directly in the Q&A button there. So Michelle, when you want, you can go ahead, please.
Takeaways from our International Energy Outlook 2023. I also want to say thank you for your graciousness in welcoming this presentation in English. On our planning call, I took 5 years of Latin in high school, and I am 100% certain that will be helpful for no one in the audience today. So thank you. I want to start with a little background on what EIA is and what EIA does to kind of build on what's already been said. We are the statistical and analytical agency within the Department of Energy, and we are fortunate that we've invested with a unique authority to collect energy data from our U.S. energy industry. This enables us to be the U.S.'s premier source of energy information, and we publish that energy data externally to our stakeholders without a fee. We also use it internally to inform our modeling and analysis. By law, all of our products, our data analysis, forecasts, and projections are independent of the approval of any other member of the U.S. government. We really prize that independence, and we believe it brings real value to our products. So today I'm going to present some key takeaways from our IEO 2023. This publication includes comprehensive data sets as well as in-depth analysis of global energy trends through 2050. We've made several improvements to our IEO 2023 since our last release in October of 2021. First of all, we greatly improved our narrative, the narrative which is the compilation of our analysis and is the venue through which our analysts can explain our results and translate our modeling and analysis into a real-world context. Within the narrative, we added technical notes, which are shown on the screen here as that light blue box in the middle. And these provide a deeper dive on technical details and modeling issues. We added 3 of those in IEO 2023 on EV projections and how those are modeled, on the storage representation in the electric power sector, and on global refineries. Also within this year's narrative, we added a focus on the range of results across cases. So not just highlighting the reference case, but rather the range across the 7 cases to really underscore the uncertainty inherent in our projections. To provide more insight on that range of results across cases, we increased the number of cases we offered. So we increased our number of side cases from 4 to 6, adding 2 more cases that looked at what happens if you vary the assumptions around capital costs of zero carbon technologies, which we define as solar, wind, all renewables, nuclear, and storage. In addition, we made some further improvements to our modeling, including adding new analysis regions. So in our IEO, we break the world into 16 regions. 9 of those 16 are single countries like China, India, Russia, and Brazil. The others are multi-country regions, so like the Middle East and Western Europe, of which Spain is a part. In IEO 2023, we redefined those regions to provide better geographic alignment. We also brought in a brand new oil and gas supply module, which brings optimization modeling capabilities to the oil and gas supply and refining sectors. And we increased the temporal resolution of our electricity model. So instead of breaking a calendar year into 12 separate time chunks, we now break it into 288. And that helps us better represent electricity supply and demand, as well as wind, solar, and storage dispatch. Lastly, we made several assumptions about the impacts of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine, and we've outlined those assumptions sector by sector in one of the report's appendices. So to better understand the results I'm going to present today, I want to clearly define what each of our cases represent. But first, let me start by saying in all of our cases, we only consider current laws and regulations. We do not incorporate any aspirational goals. We only include enacted legislation that's legally enforceable. Internationally, those policies were frozen in March of 2023. And in the US, which our projections come from the AEO 2023, the AEO being our long-term domestic outlook, those US policy assumptions were frozen in November of 2022. It's also worth noting that we're deliberately conservative in our modeling approach. Our administrator calls our outlook plausible but sober. We don't consider potential technology breakthroughs, and we don't consider sweeping changes in consumer preference. While these things could happen, the intent of the IEO is to be a policy-neutral baseline that focuses on the current trajectory of the energy system, something we believe is a useful baseline for decision makers. Going now into the specifics of our 7 cases as outlined in the table on this slide. I'm going to start with the reference case on that top row. In the reference case, we assume that GDP across the globe grows on average 2.6% per year, and this is over 2022 to 2050. Brent crude prices, while they start around $102 a barrel in 2022, they fluctuate slightly, and then they also end at $102 a barrel in 2050, and that's in 2022 dollars. For zero carbon technologies, again, wind, solar, battery, and nuclear, we observe capital cost reductions over 2022 to 2050 that reach up to 20%. It's up to 20% capital cost reductions. And this happens through technology learning, which is capital cost reductions associated with each doubling of a technology's installed capacity. The second set of cases that we consider varies our underlying macroeconomic assumptions. In these cases, which have a significant impact on results, we altered regional GDP growth rates based on GDP per capita. We slowed our global average GDP growth rate to 1.8% per year in the low economic growth rate case and raised it to 3.4% per year in the high economic growth rate case. For our oil prices, these trajectories are formulated outside of the model and then fed into the model as modeling input. We varied our reference case oil price assumption from that $102 a barrel in 2050 down to $48 in our low price case and up to $187 in our high oil price case. Finally, the 2 new cases we offered in IEO 2023 varied our capital cost assumptions for zero carbon technologies. In the reference case, like I said, those technologies achieved capital cost declines due to technology learning. But in our low zero carbon technology cost case, we reduced those cost reductions even further, bringing them 40% lower than reference case costs in 2050. Whereas in our high zero carbon technology cost case, costs were held constant at 2022 levels. So now that we've talked through EIA's unique lens and how we constructed our cases, I want to present to you today some key takeaways from our IEO 2023 in 3 broad categories which parallel the structure of our report. First, I'm going to dive into the projections of our primary energy as we see how the impacts of varying macroeconomic assumptions affect demand and end-use sectors and how that translates into energy-related emissions. Then I'm going to shift a focus to the electric power sector and see how the growing electricity demand plays out across various sources of electricity. And then last, I'm going to take a look at the role energy security plays, particularly on its impact of fossil fuel consumption and how that varies by region. So let's get started with the first one. The first set of results I want to present is a global overview of GDP on the left, primary energy use in the center, and CO2 emissions on the right. Just to orient you to these graphs, the black line represents the reference case and the gray bands or the gray shaded area represent the range of results across all 7 cases. And this is going to be the construct of the graphs you'll see throughout the presentation. You'll notice going left to right on this slide, the slope of these graphs keeps decreasing. So GDP is growing rapidly. Primary energy use is also growing, but at a slower rate. And then finally, emissions, while also have a dampened growth rate, do continue to increase through a majority of our cases through 2050. Looking at how the first graph translates into the middle graph, we're seeing that strong GDP growth coupled with population growth drives primary energy use. Because as populations grow and the wealth of those populations grow, they tend to demand more goods and services that require energy to produce them. Looking at how the middle graph translates to the graph on the right, while we do assume declines in energy and carbon intensity over time, so that's kind of dampening that growth rate, the primary energy growth is strong enough that we're still seeing emissions rise through 2050 in a majority of our cases. And again, this is under current laws and regulations. So the key takeaway here is that the upward pressure of GDP and population growth outweigh the downward pressures of energy and carbon intensity reductions on emissions. So I'm going to disaggregate that middle graph we just saw on the last slide, the primary energy, into two fuel groups here. So here we're looking at fossil fuel energy in gray or black, and non-fossil fuels shown in blue. What you can see is that increasing demand in current policies drives steady growth in fossil energy, but even faster growth in the non-fossil energy. So fossil fuels grow from 2020 to 2022 by anywhere from 1 to 40%, but the non-fossil fuels grow from 70 to 125%. Wind and solar in particular grow the fastest across all cases due to current policy and falling cost assumptions. In particular, these renewable technologies generally support new demand growth in the electric power sector. On the fossil fuel growth, and kind of getting back to what we talked to earlier, I know EIA is a little unique in projecting a continued rise in fossil fuel consumption. So I want to walk you through the three individual fossil fuels and explain what we're seeing on a fuel by fuel basis. So let me start here with coal. Growth in global coal consumption is primarily seen in the electric power and industrial sectors. Although a lot of regions are decreasing their coal use, even China, which is the world's largest coal consumer, we're projecting their coal consumption declines 18% over 22 to 2050. While we do see their decline, we are seeing India nearly doubling their coal consumption over the same time frame. But in India, this is primarily in the industrial sector. So that was coal. Now thinking about liquids across all sectors, the fastest growth in liquids consumption is in industrial applications, such as chemical production. While transportation does have the largest share of liquids consumption, the growth of transportation's use of liquids consumption is moderated by growing EV adoption and efficiency gains. So that moderated growth in transportation, while it's still growth and while it is moderated, it only partially offsets the liquids consumption growth in the industrial sector. Again, this is under current laws. Regionally, we're seeing that India, again, has the fastest projected growth in liquid fuels consumption, again, more than doubling across all cases. And then finally, natural gas. Natural gas consumption growth is seen also in both the electric power and industrial sectors. Despite strong growth in zero carbon technologies, natural gas-fired plants that are currently installed and currently operational continue to generate. In the industrial sector, natural gas consumption is driven by increased production of basic chemicals in regions such as here in the US. And then in the Middle East, natural gas consumption grows as it plays a role in the production and processing of natural gas and oil for exports. To better illustrate those sectoral trends, here I'm showing energy consumption. So this is across all fuels, but divided by sector. While you can see that end-use energy consumption grows across all sectors through 2050, across all cases, I want to call out in particular the significance of the industrial sector, which is shown on the top here in green. It has the largest share of energy consumption across the sectors, and it grows the fastest. The industrial sector has the widest range of consumption across cases also, growing anywhere between 0.3 to 1.7% a year. And this is largely due to this sector's heightened sensitivity to macroeconomic drivers. In the transportation sector, which is shown here in blue, the overall travel demand is also growing through 2050. One interesting finding that we noted is that rising incomes in several regions enable travelers to shift from inexpensive but more efficient modes of transportation. So from 2- and 3-wheelers and buses to more convenient but less efficient modes such as LDVs or light-duty vehicles. Globally, the on-road LDV fleet grows from about 1.4 billion in 2022 to more than 2 billion by 2050. Within the LDVs, we are seeing a technological shift from internal combustion engines to EVs. And by 2050, EVs account for 29 to 54% of new vehicle sales. With continued increases in EV adoption, we do see a peak of the global fleet of internal combustion light-duty vehicles across all cases, and we project that this peak happens between 2027 and 2033. Focusing now on the shares of two types of EVs in 4 regions, I'm showing here battery electric in blue and plug-in hybrid electric in yellow. And one thing that I think jumps out is that the BEVs in blue tend to dominate the PHEVs across the regions. And this is because the PHEVs might tend to make sense in the interim, but with time, as battery costs continue to fall, BEVs are far more cost competitive. You can also see the impact that policy has by comparing the first 2 panels, which are China and Western Europe, where there are strong policies in place to support EV adoption. This compares to India and Japan, the 3rd and 4th panels, which are much more sensitive to fuel prices and hence have wider bands across the cases. So I'm going to shift now to the electric power sector and discuss some key results regarding various technologies in that sector. So this slide is showing electricity generation by fuel. And I want to call out that the graph of the total across fuels in the upper left here does have a different y-axis than the other 5 fuel-specific graphs. So not surprisingly, solar and wind have the highest level of generation growth. However, it's important to note that existing coal and natural gas plants continue to operate. So while coal is flat or declining, natural gas is flat or rising. While these fossil fuels growth rate is nothing compared to that of solar and wind, they do remain a stable part of the generation mix. As far as capacity, which I'm not showing on this slide, global capacity by 2050 increases by 1.5 to 2 times what it was in 2020, reaching as much as 4,600 to 9,200 gigawatts by 2050. Of the new global generating capacity installed across cases, zero carbon technologies make up a staggering 81 to 95% share of that new capacity that's installed. Shifting now to the final highlight, which is the role that energy security has in the transition away from fossil fuels. I want to illustrate this dynamic by looking at electricity capacity in 4 select regions. Going left to right, I'm showing Western Europe, India, China, and Africa. And these are broken out by zero carbon technologies, which again are renewables and nuclear in blue, and by fossil-based technologies, which are in gray. Across almost all regions, zero carbon technologies increase through 2050 under current policies. There is regional variation, however, in the growth or lack thereof of the fossil fuel technologies. In Western Europe and India, the first 2 panels, growth in zero carbon technology is projected to accompany a flat to declining change in fossil fuels. In Western Europe, energy security considerations favor the use of locally available resources such as wind and solar, and we see increasing installations of these technologies along with batteries. In India, the rapid growth of zero carbon technologies is heavily influenced by our macroeconomic assumptions. In China and Africa, however, the 3rd and 4th panels here, we see growth in both zero carbon and fossil fuel technologies. Locally available, cheap and abundant fossil fuel resources are key in both China and Africa, where electricity demand growth is rapid, and in Africa, especially where there is no uniform policy limiting their use. One fossil fuel in particular, natural gas, is an important part of the electricity generation mix, which is one of the key considerations of this fuel's global trade dynamics, which takes me to natural gas trade. This graph shows net natural gas trade. Above the axis, we're showing net imports, and below the x-axis, we're showing net exports. What I think really stands out here is not only the level, but the range of net imports in the Asia-Pacific region, which is shown in light blue at the top. This is primarily driven by the growing demand in China, as well as the level and range of net exports from the Middle East, which is shown in light brown at the bottom. These differences are largely driven by macroeconomic assumptions, and by 2050, global natural gas demand is about 200 TCF in the reference case and grows to over 240 TCF in the high economic growth case. As I mentioned earlier, these IEO 2023 results use our AEO 2023 cases for the US projections. Obviously, those US projections are a subset of the North American grouping shown in this slide in green. In the AEO reference case, the US exported roughly 10 TCF of LNG in 2050. How much that US natural gas exports vary in the IEO is largely determined by how much they vary in the AEO, particularly in the AEO's high and low economic growth cases. Because US LNG exports are fixed to the AEO projections, US export growth is limited in our IEO also. So when you combine that lack of significant growth of the US exports with the assumed limited growth from Russia, the Middle East, which holds about 40% of the world's natural gas reserves, significantly increases its exports to meet growing natural gas demand. So hopefully I have piqued your curiosity about what US LNG exports could be under different assumptions, in which case it is now the perfect time for me to hand the floor over to Stephen, who will discuss some findings from a supplemental study, which explored a broader range of US LNG export volumes. And with that, I will stop sharing and hand it over to Stephen.
All right, I think I should be sharing now.
Yeah, you're sharing it. Yeah, we can see it.
Awesome. Yeah, so I will be covering our LNG export projections for from a US perspective. Our domestic LNG projections come from our annual energy outlook 2023, also known as AEO 2023, and that explores long-term energy trends in the United States. AEO 2023 was released on March 16th, 2023. However, I do want to point out that most of our LNG assumptions used in this projection are even older, mostly being finalized by the summer of 2022. One cross-cutting change in our AEO 2023 is that it reflects many of the changes from the Inflation Reduction Act, and that was passed in early 2022, and altered US policy be used to develop our projections. And I mostly say this because, while the Inflation Reduction Act didn't directly target anything relating to LNG, LNG still was affected through indirect effects by changes in other sectors, such as the electric power sector, and that can alter the U.S. supply natural gas, U.S. supply and demand natural gas balance. And lastly, I do want to point out that the AEO 2023 does not include the recent pause on pending LNG export approvals. We have not yet analyzed the effects of the pause, and according to the announcement, the pause is temporary, and therefore it's unclear what the long-term effects of that pause will be. In the AEO, LNG export capacity from the US is endogenously built based on economics of adding new capacity. However, we do exogenously add LNG export capacity based on projects that were already under construction at the time of preparing AEO 2023. This table lists out the 5 LNG exports projects that were under construction in the summer of 2022 that were exogenously added as capacity. I am mostly pointing this out for context because it has been quite a long time since since when we prepared AEO 2023 and today, and there have been significant developments for LNG projects in the past year, which alters our current understanding of LNG capacity that is expected to come online in the near term. For example, new projects are now under construction, while other projects have been delayed and are now expected to come online later than we originally thought when we were preparing AEO 2023. And I will discuss more of the upcoming projects and kind of what our current estimates are for that at a later time in the presentation. But I just wanted to give you some context into what our assumptions were for the AEO prior to going into the projection results. Moving on to results, we find that our LNG export projections tend to grow, but are sensitive to oil prices. In AEO 2023, we project that the US LNG exports will reach about 10 trillion cubic feet in 2050 in the reference case, right here. However, depending on assumed oil prices, our LNG exports are projected to range from a high of 14 trillion cubic feet in 2050 in the high oil price case to a low of about 5 trillion cubic feet in the low oil price case. Historically, most LNG was traded under long-term oil price-linked contracts because a global LNG price benchmark did not exist, and because oil could substitute for natural gas in industry and for power generation, which was especially common in Asia. And these factors contributed to highly correlated international natural gas and oil prices. With the growth of more market-based LNG, the relationship between international natural gas prices and oil prices has eroded in more recent years. However, we expect that future oil prices will continue to have at least some effect on additional LNG export capacity and overall export levels. In general, we project that when the Brent oil price is high relative to the U.S. Henry Hub natural gas price, like in the high oil price case, building more LNG capacity and exporting more LNG is more economical compared to when the Brent oil price is lower relative to the Henry Hub. So you can see in the lower oil price case, the Brent price is lower and the Henry Hub price is higher, which curtails LNG exports to below current volumes in the near term and causes LNG export capacity to be underutilized at the end of the projection period. And the opposite is true when the Brent price is higher relative to the Henry Hub. We see higher LNG export prices, or higher LNG exports. Following the release of AEO 2023, I wrote a report or a paper where I analyzed the effects of how changes to international LNG prices could affect US LNG export volumes. And then we also looked into, what those LNG export volumes does to the US domestic natural gas market. And in this paper, I analyzed 3 additional side cases that were not part of our, standard AEO side case suite. I analyzed a high LNG price case that assumes LNG prices in Europe and Asia are higher by nearly 25% relative to the reference case in 2050. A low LNG price case that assumes LNG prices in Europe and Asia are lower by an average of nearly 20% relative to the reference case, and a fast builds plus high LNG price case, where we assume that the same price assumptions as the high LNG price case, but we also assume our LNG capacity can expand faster than the reference case. In this case, we assume our LNG capacity can expand to a maximum of 800 billion cubic feet per year, compared to expanding only 600 billion cubic feet per year in the reference case. And that's equivalent to essentially allowing an extra LNG train or LNG export, terminal to come online per year. I do want to clarify that this analysis does not model international energy markets, and so it doesn't take into account interactions between the U.S. and it doesn't take into account interactions between U.S. natural gas exports and world natural gas markets. And we also don't model for this study the constraints such as regasification capacity abroad, the availability of LNG tankers, or potential competition from LNG originating from other countries. We also don't publish any projections on the destination of where the LNG would be exported to. Getting into the results of our analysis, we find that lifting model capacity build constraints combined with higher world LNG prices increases US LNG exports. In the fast builds plus high LNG price case, we project that the LNG exports rise 76% from the reference case. And these volumes exceed the amount of baseload capacity that has received full regulatory approval from DOE and FERC, and that's kind of listed right here. By 2050, in the high LNG price case, where we assume LNG capacity can't quite build as quickly as the fast builds case. Exports rise 46% compared to the reference case to about 15 trillion cubic feet. And in the low LNG price case, we assume that no additional LNG export capacity is built beyond the capacity that currently exists or is already under construction. And LNG export volumes stay near current levels and are projected to be just under 6 trillion cubic feet in 2050. One of the biggest motivators of these LNG price cases that we put together was analyzing how international LNG prices might impact domestic natural gas prices in the US through changes in LNG export volumes. Our modeling finds that additional US LNG exports increase the natural gas spot price in the US, also known as the Henry Hub, but not to levels beyond recent history or beyond other AEO 2023 side cases, such as the low oil and gas supply case. Our projections show that of these LNG price cases, the Henry Hub reaches a high of about $4.80 per MMBTU in the fast builds plus high LNG price case in 2050, and a low of about $3.30 in the low LNG price case. For perspective, we project the Henry Hub spot price to be $3.80 in the reference case in 2050. So according to our models, the 50% increase in LNG exports in the fast builds plus high LNG price case results in about a 25% increase in domestic natural gas prices. And since end-use natural gas prices are influenced by the spot prices we're projecting, this leads to increases in delivered residential, commercial, industrial, and electric power prices, as those end-use delivered prices need to fully incorporate the spot price of natural gas. Since AEO 2023 was released, there have been several developments in the North American LNG market that are important to note. According to our latest estimates as of November 2023, we expect North American LNG capacity to increase by 12.9 billion cubic feet per day, with 9.7 billion cubic feet per day coming from the US, 2.1 from Canada, and 1.1 from Mexico. For the United States, the Rio Grande, Port Arthur, and Plaquemines Phase 2 projects, which together account for about 5 billion cubic feet per day, are now currently under construction, but weren't when AEO 2023 was prepared. And so they weren't included in our our AEO 2023 explicitly, but they would be included in any future AEOs that we'd be releasing. And then I also want to point out that the LNG export volumes from Mexico are very important from a US perspective, because most of that natural gas would actually be flowing, that would be flowing into those LNG terminals, would actually need to be imported from the United States via pipeline. So even though they're not explicitly US LNG exports, they are still very important to the US because of its role in affecting the US natural gas supply and demand balance. The projects in Canada are a little less relevant from a US perspective because they will be supplied using natural gas in Western Canada instead of needing to import any natural gas for liquefaction. And that is all we have. And here are the kind of links to the reports, the IEO, AEO, and then also the paper where we look at the effects of liquefied natural gas exports on the US natural gas market.
Okay, thanks, Stephen. So we have about 15 minutes for Q&A. We do have some in the chat, but I don't know if anyone in the room wants to. They ask you, well, you showed in your slide and you mentioned that the zero carbon technologies you have into consideration to analyze their cost were solar, wind, storage, and nuclear. And so they're asking you if you have analyzed the technology cost for other technologies such as green hydrogen, CCS, or biofuels, and if you have had these technologies into consideration in your outlook.
We don't incorporate hydrogen into our outlook yet. It is obviously a very important and meaningful emerging technology that we want to incorporate. The AEO, this probably is going to dovetail into another one of your questions, but I think it's pertinent to bring it up now. We're currently taking a pause in our AEO publication, and we are not releasing an AEO in 2024. We're also not releasing an IEO this year in 2024, so that we can dedicate resources to implementing hydrogen in the AEO. And going forward, we'd like to think through how we could potentially dovetail the AEO and the IEO with this representation of hydrogen. But for right now, we're focusing on bringing hydrogen into the AEO. So hydrogen is not in the IEO. You asked also about CCS. Currently, we represent 3 technologies with CCS in the electric power sector: biomass, coal, IGCC, and natural gas combined cycle. Those 3 technologies with CCS are represented in the electric power sector. We do allow technology learning to occur for those 3 technologies. So again, with each doubling of installed capacity, we see capital cost reductions. Of course, this varies by technology for various reasons. For biomass with CCS, we see about a 7% capital cost reduction due to learning. For coal IGCC, it's about 9%. And for natural gas with CCS, again, that's natural gas combined cycle with CCS, we see about a 19% capital cost reduction over the time horizon. And then you asked about biofuels, and we do represent biofuels in our projections. They include ethanol and biomass-based diesel. These are exogenous projections that are brought into our model, and analyst judgment primarily focuses on global biodiesel prices and feedstock prices. So those prices are strongly considered in our biomass projections.
Okay. Stephen, this is for you, I think. They ask, will the Altamira plant in Mexico, which will have U.S. gas via pipeline, be able to supply Puerto Rico while avoiding the Jones Act?
I don't think I can give a confident answer to that. I'm not a Jones Act expert in some of the technicalities. So I don't want to say one way or the other if Puerto Rico will be a potential supply source, because I'm not kind of a Jones Act expert. So I'll have to shy away from giving a definitive answer on it.
2 questions about Europe. One is, what are some of the main takeaways from your projection concerning Europe? And another one is, how does it match the increase on imports to Europe with the emission objective of the European Union?
So let me start. Some key takeaways from Europe. Obviously, I talked through the EVs, and we're seeing strong EV adoption policy in Europe, supporting those EVs and driving some of the global penetration rates we're seeing across the world. Some other key takeaways for Europe is, of course, energy security concerns. So, Europe is trying to, or as we saw, certain policies come through in the end use sectors. They want to decrease their carbon intensity and get away from that reliance on Russian fossil fuels. So they put policies in place to drive electrification and decarbonization in the industrial and buildings, so commercial, residential, and district heat sectors. In Western Europe, we saw those sectors, while still growing in natural gas consumption, growing at a much slower rate than other economic indicators might suggest. So we're thinking this is a result of the policies put in place to kind of get off that reliance of Russian fossil fuels. I can't necessarily talk to how the two marry, other than those policies put in place to electrify those sectors are, you're still going to see increasing natural gas demand, but it's at a slower rate. So I think that's the real critical piece of the puzzle, is that it's still growing, but it's growing a lot slower.
Yeah, there's a question in the room.
Thank you. Another question for Europe. I think if I recall correctly from the graph, you still see the survivance of fossil fuels in Europe through 2050, despite the growing renewables and solar and wind. And I think in 23 it was like 20% of what represented gas generation in the biggest countries like France, Spain, Italy, Germany, and wouldn't you see the risk of renewables basically removing gas at all by 2030, or not talking even by 2050?
I think, again, it's important to realize we're capturing current laws and current laws and policies. So the current laws are incentivizing renewables, but they're not making it so it's a clean sweep. And we still, especially in our electric power sector, we have an economic model. So given the intermittency concerns of renewables and giving the cost considerations. So, sure, renewables are getting cheaper, and I think you're going to build new renewables to meet new demand. But with your currently installed coal and natural gas plants, it's still in some places cheaper, or, adds to the reliability considerations to continue to run those plants that are already installed and then build new renewables to meet new demand. So I think, like I said, with the one of the slides I showed, like 81 to 95% of new capacity is renewables, but that it currently installed coal in some cases, and definitely natural gas, is still an important part of the electricity generation mix, given that it's already installed. It's economic to continue to run it.
Thanks, Michelle. Another question is if there are any countries that are expected to import US LNG for the first time in 2024 or 2025.
Hoping that was Stephen was going to unmute.
No, I mean, that's more of a, at least I focus more on the long-term LNG projections. I wouldn't be able to give an answer to that right now. I might be able to talk to someone at EIA who focus more on short-term LNG. But it's not something that we would model in our projections or anything like that. So it's not something we give an answer to right now.
Another question in the chat, which I think you answered by explaining that your report is more projections and not forecast. They say, we see some differences between different outlooks from different institutions. For example, the International Energy Agency points out that the peak demand for fossil fuel is said to be reached around 2030, while your outlook differs from this. And they ask, where do these differences come from and how should we interpret them?
Right. Thank you for that. And I tried to, I anticipated this question, so I tried to cover it in my presentation, but it's definitely, their report made a big splash and a very important contrast to our report. They're also released about a week apart. So it was easy to see the differences when the two reports are kind of juxtaposed in by a week. But I think what's interesting about the IEA, and I don't want to talk too much about them because I'm definitely not an expert in their model and their assumptions, but it's my understanding that they take, like in their STEPS case, they take current laws and policies, but when those policies are set to expire, they assume policy extensions. So they assume a similar type of policy will be enacted at or before the expiration of the current policy. Whereas we are incredibly literal and by the books. So if a policy is set to expire in a certain year, we let it expire. We don't assume a new policy, whether analogous or more or less stringent. We don't assume any new policies or any aspirational goals. So given that fact alone, I think you're going to see, a little bit less of a rosy picture painted by EIA because we are so literal and by the books. I think it's also important to consider, I think the biggest change for the IEA was that they saw peak liquids for the first time. And that's why they were able to see in aggregate peak fossil. So looking just at liquids and why we're why we're continuing to see growth there, and like I said in the presentation, was because of the industrial sector. And I don't think this isn't a secret. I mean, the industrial sector is an incredibly hard to decarbonize sector. And I think it's receiving a lot of focus currently, a lot of attention in how industrial policies. But as it is, given the economic incentives for the products of the industrial sector and the current processes and technologies that are used to produce those products, and under current policy, we're seeing a continued growth in liquids fuels, primarily in the industrial policy and in the industrial sector. So I think that's one of the main reasons why that coupled with policy assumptions from IEA is one of the two main reasons we're different.
We have one more question in the chat, which is, there's another one here. Paco, okay. They ask you, Stephen, what are the main reasons that you mentioned for the recent pause on pending LNG export approval, and which countries are affected by the pause?
For the reasons for the pause, I mean, I'll defer to when the pause was announced, the White House put out a kind of a press statement in kind of detailing, that the pause is happening and why they're doing it. And then the statement, they mention, kind of two big reasons for the pause. The first, or a few, the first thing they mentioned that the approval process is to approve LNG export volumes is about 5 years old. It hasn't been evaluated for about 5 years. So they're putting a pause on the LNG export approvals until they can reevaluate that approval process. And they're really wanting to reevaluate two things in that approval process that they say is missing. The first would be that the current approval process does not take into account LNG, the effects that LNG exports might have on US consumers. So that's currently not considered in the current approval process that they want to kind of take another look at. And they also point out that the current approval process does not take into account fully the environmental or emissions aspect of LNG and exporting that abroad. So they're really taking a pause. So the biggest reasons are they're taking a pause to reevaluate that part of the approval process. In terms of which countries will be affected, the pause only affects non-free trade agreement countries. So it doesn't affect every country, but just the ones that don't have a free trade agreement with the United States. Specifically, which countries might be affected more or others, we haven't done an analysis to say kind of in detail which ones would bear the brunt versus others. So I can't speak to that.
And last question, there's a question, two questions here in the room. Javier, please.
And the question is about the effects on industrial competitiveness of industry in Europe, also in Spain. I realize, you, Stephen, said that still this recent announcement from President Biden has not been analyzed in terms of longer impact, but definitely has an impact on expectations of industry. For example, here in Spain, 50% of natural gas demand is on industry. Michelle said, and we are aware that it's very difficult to decarbonize high temperature processes, electrifications. We are running on biogas, biomethane, and also hydrogen will take at least 5-7 more years. So more than a question, because as Stephen said, you didn't analyze consequences yet in countries. I will encourage you to analyze how the gap of competitiveness between the industry already in the States or in Europe, it's going to be affected, because that announce already had consequences on the investment plans of all these industrial capacities in Europe. So just that factor in the questions, as we asked previously to the IEA, to take into consideration industrial effects, industrial competitiveness when it comes to these new announcements of LNG exporters.
Okay, Michelle, Stephen, you want to say something or?
Yeah, I don't know if it's more of an IEO on how the you're talking about like on the IEO side, how they kind of reflect industrial demand in response to the pause.
Sure. All I can say is that we, like Stephen said, that the pause is so new. It did not come from Department of Energy. We heard about it like you guys heard about it. I appreciate the sentiment. It's really meaningful to hear these perspectives, especially in various countries from various sector specific, country specific perspectives and how this might be affecting you. I definitely noted your comment. I will take this into consideration for future analyses. As far as how our module works with demand, macroeconomic assumptions drive demand at the end use sector. End use sector demand is met by our supply modules. So it just does it's a Gauss-Seidel iteration where the lowest cost supply is met with, it meets demand, and then they just iterate until the convergence is met on price quantity pairs. So it's probably not as politically savvy as maybe you would want. It's a very mathematical explanation. It's kind of agnostic to some of these policy considerations, but I can relay your concerns, your suggestions, and take this into account as we shape future analyses.
Javier says thank you. You don't get to see him. Paco, last question here in the room. Oh, there's another one. There's another one after Paco.
Introduce yourself.
Yeah. Quick question. Just refer to the slides on the current policies when there's the outlook going to 2050, and you have this steady growth in fossil fuels. So my question here, and probably is in the full report in the outlook is already there, but just two parts. First, whether this consumption is related somehow with abated fossil fuels, abated consumption, and second is how that amount and projections and outlook fits with these 1.5 degree scenarios or 2 or 3 degree scenarios. Thank you.
Introduce yourself. Dile quién eres.
Francisco.
We do model CCS on 3 technologies: biomass, coal, IGCC, and advanced natural gas combined cycle. We do model those with CCS, with a CCS option in the electric power sector. However, we are seeing, they can freely be built, but it's an economic model, and unfortunately, they're pretty cost prohibitive. We only really see them built in Canada and China, and they end up being like less than 5% of the world's capacity. I think it ends up being something even smaller than that, like less than 1% by 2050. So we do include those now. Looking forward in the IEO, we don't have hydrogen currently modeled. We'd like to, actually, one of the internal efforts we're going to focus on this year is how we can expand our modeling to include further decarbonization pathways. So that's something we will be focusing on with hopefully more details in the future. And then how that translates to the 1.5 degrees. We don't explicitly translate our energy-related carbon dioxide emissions projections to a number of degrees warming. I can tell you, though, that in our reference case, we do see energy-related carbon dioxide emissions grow 15% from 2022 to 2050. So that's just in the reference case. Our low economic growth case is the only case where we actually see emissions drop from 2022 to 2050, and it's just a slight drop.
Are there any other questions in the room? Yeah, can you introduce yourself also, please?
Thank you, Igor. Very quick one. This is about the installed rooftop solar plant panels. Was this included in your graph that you showed earlier on the solar projection growth? And if not, like how big is the risk? Because, like, for example, I think in Netherlands and and many like in the South US, California, it's a growing risk for fossil fuels especially, and how big you see this risk for them? Thank you.
That's a great question. Unfortunately, we don't have the modeling granularity to capture rooftop solar per se. We do have it incorporated more of like an analyst judgment in that the building's consumption, so energy use in buildings is decremented by an amount that we assume would be used in the rooftop solar to supply that. So it's not, I'm sorry, it's not a very satisfying answer, but we don't explicitly model it. The solar projections I'm showing here are utility scale.
So if there are no more questions, Arcadio, Brandon?
Some questions?
Oh, there's
more
one.
here.
Yeah.
So, I know, it's okay? It's okay?
Yeah.
Okay, thank you very much, all of you. First of all, Michelle and Stephen, thank you, the Energy Information Administration, for this collaboration with us. It's a pleasure. We will see you, all of you, here next time. Bright future for LNG, American LNG, I understood, no, after this report, no, bright future. And thank you very much to Brandon and the U.S. Embassy here in Spain. We will continue with that, no? Maybe in the next time we will have more time to comment all of this. Thank you very much. Thank you very much, all of you, for being here, no? The people who are here, the people who are in the network. But thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.